Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm here to look at Newcastle United's draw with Everton at St James's Park on Tuesday night. 1-1 it finished. It was a really frustrating game, I think, for the home side because they should have won the game. They did enough to win it across the 90 minutes and let it slip at the end of the game. It's another example of that that's happened quite a few times this season. If you think back to Liverpool in August, you think back to PSG, Chelsea in the Cup as well. So many examples of late goals going in and sort of undoing Newcastle's good work earlier in the game. And that's happened again. And in a sense, this is a more frustrating version of that because there was no way that Everton were coming back in this game for long periods. Newcastle had them where they wanted them for the first half, particularly. Everton were coming into the game looking to avoid a 13th game without a win, which they obviously have gone into, which is a record that goes back to 1957. They're on a torrid run. They can't score any goals. They were there for the taking, and Newcastle played like that in the first half. They scored an early goal through Alex Isak, and they really should have put the game to bed. Jordan Pickford made a string of very good saves in the first half to deny Jacob Murphy, among others. There were a lot of opportunities for Newcastle to put the game to bed in the first half. Then there's a second half goal disallowed for offside that Isak set up for Dan Burn. He was just offside, according to VAR. For me, it was the turning point in the game, actually, because at that stage, you really felt like Everton were going to bring the cavalry on. They had a stronger bench than Newcastle, which is ultimately did it for Newcastle, I think, but we'll get into that injury situation in a minute. Like Everton were going to make some substitutions at that point, just before the goal went in. That goal goes in, the game's done. It's not counting, and Everton are then able to bring on the likes of Angel Gomez, James Garner, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. And then they got a bit of momentum. Garner was very strong in midfield, hit the post. Newcastle were on the back foot for a little bit, regained themselves, I thought, and then conceded a stupid penalty through Paul Dummett. The fact that Paul Dummett's on the pitch is also indicative of how Newcastle's injury issues are again at the height that they are, because funnily enough, they sort of eased off a few weeks ago, and now they're back to where they were. And Newcastle had one probably fully senior good enough first team player on the bench in Joe Willock, and then after that it was very, very slim pickings. There was very little for Newcastle to really do off the bench if it did indeed go wrong, as it did. And yeah, it's such a difficult result to take from their perspective because this was all in their hands. They had Everton exactly where they wanted them, and then the stupidity of Paul Dummett to bring down Ashley Young in the box, hauling down when the ball's nowhere near him from a free kick, just says, just sort of typifies how frustrating it's been all season with this sort of thing. Newcastle have, it sort of summed up the season in the sense that they had momentum, they didn't quite capitalise on it, things have gone wrong, and then it's all unravelled, and that's just another 2 points dropped in the race for Europe. They could have been up to 7th if they held on. In fact, they're still 8th. They're still behind West Ham and Manchester United. Manchester United played Chelsea this week, so hoping for a draw probably in that game because it is quite tight between 6th and 10th, 11th still. So it's not the end of the world. 4 points is a decent return if you think about West Ham on Saturday, that craziness that happened there, the 4-3 comeback win. Maybe in a few weeks' time we'll look back at this week and think, that was probably par 4 points. But having beaten West Ham and having gone through that, and that was a taxing game obviously, and Newcastle's injury problems are stacking up. There's no Trippier in either game, no Livramento came off in that game, Almiron came off in that game, all three of whom aren't going to be fit for Fulham. They're going to be out for a while, so there's no fresh players other than Anthony Gordon, who was suspended out of that game, coming back for Fulham, which is a huge shame. Maybe it came a little bit too early in terms of, they were on a high from the West Ham game, but it took a lot out of them. 2 days later, they have to play Everton, who are a physical team, who are battling for their lives, a very typical Sean Dyche team, as you would expect them to be. And it just turned out to be very, very difficult in the end for Newcastle to hold on. But having said that, I don't think that Everton, by the time the penalty happened, I don't think if that penalty doesn't happen, Everton are going to come back. They weren't exactly peppering Martin Dubravka, who I thought played very well, despite having accrued a lot of criticism in recent weeks for understandable reasons. Dan Burn is another one who played at centre half alongside Fabian Schär and was absolutely brilliant. I thought he was, it was one of his best games this season, and it almost sort of adds to the frustration of the last time I was stood in this office talking about Sven Botman and how, he played on, and there was an opportunity for Dan Burn to play in centre half, and he's come in and shown again just how good he can be in that position. Obviously, there's the other thing of Jamal Lascelles' injury, which is a huge shame. He's out for the same injury as Botman, 6 to 9 months of a cruciate injury, having picked that up against West Ham. So if it doesn't rain, it pours at Newcastle again. But yeah, this is, for me, I think it still doesn't really excuse what happened towards the end of the game. Newcastle did enough. They played well enough with the players that were on the pitch to win the game. They created enough. They obviously had the Mikolenko cleared off the line from Isak as well in the second half, which would have put the game to bed as well. There were chances for Newcastle to win. Everton deserve credit for the way that they held on. They've got a lot of physicality, I think. Amadou Onana's a really good midfielder. They're defensively sound. They just lack the sort of creativity and the ability to put the ball in the net. But I think they'll be fine because they've got strong enough defensively. And, I see Jordan Pickford, who got a lot of stick from Newcastle fans, but not for the first time in his career, was phenomenal. He made a string of good saves, got man of the match, and fully deserved it. Positives for Newcastle, as I say, Dan Burn. Harvey Barnes played really well. Elliot Anderson linked up quite well. But I think the biggest frustration I have is in the first half, and a little bit in the second half, particularly the first half, it was quite clear that Everton couldn't handle Newcastle when they picked up their pace and when they hit them on hard transitions through passing or running. But it was almost like there was a conscious choice not to do that all the time. Barnes and Anderson were linking up a little bit too much. There's a little bit too many passes when Barnes maybe should have run or maybe should have shot. It was like they slowed the tempo down, and yeah, it's I think that was a reason why Newcastle didn't actually put the game to bed earlier. It's just ultimately a very, very frustrating evening to look back on because of that, because that's two vital points that could have been huge in the race for Europe, given that West Ham drew with Spurs. Chelsea and Manchester United both can't pick up points. Brighton have lost at the weekend to Liverpool. Wolves lost at the weekend. The results have recently been going Newcastle's way, and that was an opportunity to really make that pay. Going into Fulham now, I think there needs to be a real bounce back, because 4 points is a good return from these two games. But if they can get 7 from the week, then that's a good week, especially considering the injury problems that are really currently plaguing them. Finally, I just want to make a couple of shout-outs to Bruno Guimaraes and Alexander Isak. Isak's finish was superb. Obviously, a lot of talk about Arsenal at the moment, and what could possibly happen with his future. Bruno Guimaraes as well, PSG, Man City. These players, they need the best players around them, and unfortunately, at the moment, because of the injury situation, they've sort of been let down in that regard, because it's frustrating. It must be frustrating for them, but they played really well yesterday. But they really, I think Bruno was the man of the match for me. The way he dragged Newcastle through late on. There was a thing that summed up his game was just after the goal that Everton scored. Everton broke through again, and he made a really crucial interception, then ran forward about 15 yards and won a free kick just by a couple of shimmies and a little drive. And that's just sort of typified what he brings to this team and how good he is. And as I say, Isak's finish was superb. 19 goals this season in all competitions for him. For me, he's the second best striker in the league behind Erling Haaland, and it'll be a challenge in the summer to keep both of those players at the club. There's something very exciting happening the weekend after. More information on that to come. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.